In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Best-selling author Nicole Maggi is no stranger to crafting compelling stories, but her latest novel, A Murder in Zion, marks an exciting new chapter in her career. Her adult fiction debut. Blending her passion for national parks with her fascination for true crime, Nicole introduces readers to Special Agent Emme Helliwell of the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch. When the body of a childhood friend is discovered in the breathtaking yet treacherous narrows of Zion National Park, it's thrust into an investigation that reveals deadly secrets lurking beneath the park's beauty. Nicole Maggi, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why did you make the switch to adult fiction after such a great career working for younger readers?
Oh, it was an organic transition. I had finished up a contract with Sourcebooks Fire for my last young adult novel, which came out in 2018. And I had some ideas and all of them trended towards adult. And I was working on a fantasy novel that was like crossover adults, new adults. It would fall into that romantasy genre now, although that wasn't a thing when I was writing it, even that was 5 years ago, maybe. And I was chatting with a friend of mine who was an agent, and I was talking to her and she was like, fantasy is a hard sell right now. And I said, I have this other idea about the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch agent. And she was like, yeah, write that one. And so I did. And that idea came to me after watching the first episode of Wild Crime on Hulu, which is a documentary series about crimes in national parks or like in wilderness. And I just was fascinated by this. And I remember saying to my husband after watching this episode, there is a job where you get to investigate crimes in national parks. And that is the coolest job ever. And he said, you should write a book about that. And I was like, you're right. I should write a book about that. So that was where the idea came to me. And so I was kicking that idea around in the back of my head while I was working on this crossover fantasy novel. And when my friend said, I think you should write that one. And I was like, I think you're right. I was more drawn to it. And so it was really just a natural transition into it because there was no way to make this book YA. That's what happened. And I had felt like maybe my YA career had run its course for the time being. I'm not closing that door permanently, but at the time I felt very much it had run its course. The book that came out in 2018 didn't do very well. So I think I need to make a change here. So it felt very organic. It felt really right.
And your YA fans are growing up too. They may well become readers for Murder in Zion.
Yeah. My thriller, The Forgetting, my YA thriller, that came out in 2015. That came out a full decade ago. So yeah, those readers are now in their 20s and even approaching 30. So for sure, now they're like almost the age of Emme.
My team warned me when I wrote a children's book, you need to look at your grown-up material now because as they age, they're going to want to read it. And you want to make sure there's nothing in there that's at all dangerous.
Yeah.
Was that a concern for you?
It wasn't really. I felt a little liberated, actually, writing an adult book. And my YA books aren't like pure and clean. There's a little bit of spice in them, not a lot of spice in them, but some of them deal with very dark issues. And The Forgetting deals with sex trafficking, and What They Don't Know deals with sexual assaults. And so those books were dark. I was already walking that dark fine line. And I remember my agent at the time saying to me, but you seem so nice. I feel like my books have always walked that line, so it wasn't really too much of a transition. And so those readers, I didn't really feel like I needed to tone anything down for them. I did have, there are a couple of sex scenes in the books, but I closed the door on them. They're very subtle. And originally they were a little bit more explicit, and my agent was like, yeah, some more grown-up mystery readers don't like as much spice, apparently. And that was something I had to learn from her. And so I was like, okay, when I toned them down, I suspect that my like younger readers who have now grown up would actually like more spice in them. And it's the older readers, the older mystery readers that probably don't like as much spice. So I tried to find a fine line there.
Nicole Maggi is our guest. Give us a spoiler-free synopsis of A Murder in Zion.
Okay. Spoiler free. Okay. Special Agent Emme Helliwell works for the National Park Service, and she is part of the elite branch of the National Park Service known as the Investigative Services Branch. So the Investigative Services Branch was created in the early 2000s to specifically investigate crimes that happen on federal lands, because whenever a crime happens on a federal land, it's automatically a federal crime. So the federal government has jurisdiction over it. So she has come home to her hometown of Springdale, Utah, to deal with her mother's house and her mother's estate after the sudden death of her mom. And she's also haunted by this case that she screwed up on, and she feels really guilty about it and very kind of gun shy, and she's filled with a lot of self-doubt. So she's handed in her 2 weeks notice, and her boss is not happy about that, but is respectful of it. And then he calls her and says, I need you on one more case because we found a body in the Narrows. The Narrows section of Zion National Park is a famous trail that is in the river. It's not even a trail. It is the river is the trail. And it's a 16-mile stretch in the river that you can hike. And so she goes into the Narrows to investigate the body, and it turns out the body is that of a childhood friend of hers. And so now she feels very compelled to see this investigation through. And it does wind up tying back to the case that has haunted her since the beginning of the book. I guess that's the spoiler-free version. I don't want to get too spoilery after that. But yes, the investigation takes many twists and turns as she proceeds.
What made you pick Zion National Park as the location?
Zion holds a special place in my heart. So when I was 10, my family I grew up in New York, upstate New York, and my family took a 10-week cross-country trip where we visited so many national parks. We didn't visit all of the national parks in the lower 48, but we saw a lot of them. And we hit Yellowstone, Grand Tetons, the Badlands, Glacier, Crater Lake, came down through California, and then on the way back, Zion, Bryce, Grand Canyon. And so I did have a love of national parks since I was a child because of that trip. But that was many moons ago, and I don't remember all of them that well. And I hadn't really visited national parks that much as an adult. It wasn't the kind of thing I sought out. Like when my husband and I decided to go on vacation, we were more apt to pick a beach in Mexico. We were not hiking through national parks. That wasn't really the vacations we were seeking. And then in 2019, I was invited to a wedding in Salt Lake City. And so my daughter and I decided to take my daughter, and I said, okay, let's take a road trip, because the wedding was like right after she got out of school. So we road tripped from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. And we stopped at Zion, Bryce, and Arches. And so Zion was the first park we visited on that trip. And I'll never forget, we drove into the park, and you drive into the park and like immediately you're surrounded by these just beautiful soaring red cliffs. And we drove in, and I had to slow the car down because I just started crying. And I realized that it is so rare in our daily lives that we are truly deeply awestruck by nature, by just natural beauty, especially when you live in a city. And I had been missing that. It was like this part of my soul that I didn't know had fallen asleep, woke up, and I realized, oh my gosh, it's awake. And I spent that whole trip on the verge of tears because I just realized how much I needed this in my life and how much I just needed to be surrounded by that kind of beauty. And it just made me feel so present. It made me feel so happy. And ever since that trip, I was like, okay, I got to seek this out whenever I can. So because Zion was the first place we went that I felt that in that particular park, when my husband said to me, you need to write a book about that, I knew immediately that Zion would be the park that I would set it in. And it just holds a very special place in my heart because of that.
A Murder in Zion is the book's title. Our special guest is best-selling author Nicole Maggi, and we're discussing this fascinating book and how it came to be. You have a background in acting. How did that influence your writing?
Yeah, I think I have a really good ear for dialogue, and I think that comes from my acting career. And I also feel when I'm writing my characters, I'm really able to sink into their point of view very deeply. And that comes from my acting training, just learning how to embody a character and really be in that character's mind and body and everything they're feeling and thinking. I feel like I'm really able to do that when I write. And yeah, it's funny. When I was an actor, someone once said to me, to be a really good actor, you have to have a thin skin because you have to let everything in, all those emotions and, everything in. But to deal with the business of acting, you need to have a very thick skin. And I think that holds true for writing as well. I think to be a really good writer, you need to have a thin skin to allow all of those emotions in. But the business of publishing, man, it's cruel. So you need to be a little bit tough to deal with that.
You've been doing this for a while. How has the business of publishing changed during your career?
I think it's gotten a lot more business-like instead of paying attention to the artistry. And it doesn't treat the artists who are like the wheels of the business, the thing that makes it run, very well. And I think that needs to change. I also think editors are really overwhelmed. So my day job is I work as an editor for a small publisher. And when I was looking at job listings and looking for a full-time editing job, it was really fascinating to me because I was looking at job listings at major publishers and like small houses, big houses, whatever. And what I realized is that editors aren't editors anymore. They're project managers. The job listings, like when you look at the responsibilities, actually editing a book is not on the responsibility list. It's everything else. It's production, all this other. They're project managers. And I think that is to the detriment of the industry. I've read books recently where I've seen continuity errors that were easily fixable, just mistakes like typos, and big best-selling authors with Pulitzer Prize winning authors with typos in their books. And I'm like, that went through like 3 people. Why didn't somebody catch that? So I think it's gotten a little bit, I don't know what the exact word I'm looking for, but I just feel like it's starting to get a little bit shoddy. And I think that's because people are ignoring the thing in the middle of the business that makes it what it is.
As an editor, do you find yourself going back as you create and fixing stuff on the fly, or are you able to get the barf draft out before you go back and look at it?
Yeah, oh God, that's so hard. I have forced myself to be able to get the barf draft out. It's really hard. It's always easier to edit somebody else's work than your own. And I work with a critique group. So by the time I get that barf and they see the barf draft, I trust them enough to see it. And so they see that. And by the time I'm done with it and go back, I have all of their notes. So I have a really good bulk of notes to be able to work through to get that second draft. I am able to turn off the editor brain when I'm writing, but it was definitely a learned skill. So.
You and I share in common stories that take place in national parks. How did you do your research to make it authentic?
I drew a lot on that trip, the trip in 2019, and what I remembered. I drew a lot and just a lot of like how I felt when I was in the park, that the beauty and the majesty of it. So I drew a lot on that. But I was also writing a lot in the height of the pandemic, so I wasn't traveling. So I did a lot of research on Google. There was this one website that has basically a step-by-step of the Narrows Trail, like all 16 miles. And I there's a scene in the book where she does hike all the 16 miles. And so I had that website open as I was writing so that I could check and look at the pictures and make sure that what I was describing was actually what was happening. Did reach out to the National Park Service, especially the rangers at Zion, to ask a couple of questions, and they graciously emailed me back. And I also did a lot of research. There's a really wonderful book called Ranger Confidential by Andrea Langford. And I used that as a resource as well. That was a really good resource. Yeah. So it was a blend of just personal experience and then also just the day-to-day research that all of us writers do.
And you do other things. You have a very full life outside of writing. How do you balance such a busy day with your creative process?
Oh man, balance is such a myth. It's such a myth. It doesn't really exist. I have a list that I put together. I do like a weekly goals list, and then I have a daily one, and it fluctuates based on, I suddenly have a doctor's appointment, or I have to drive my daughter somewhere. So it's very much in flux. I do try to carve out dedicated writing time. I know that I work best in the mornings, so I try to write in the mornings for a couple of hours, and then the rest of the day is usually spent on my editing work and various other picking up my daughter from school and making dinner and all that. I don't work very well at night. I'm not a night person. If I have to work at night, I usually will leave my editing work because that part of my brain functions a bit better than my creative brain. That's pretty much how I manage it. But yeah, it's just a constant struggle. To be honest, it is a constant struggle.
It is sad that at some point in each of our stories, a little bit of our own story leaks into it. Is there anything autobiographical in Murder in Zion?
I did lose my mom when I was a teenager. So that the grief that Emme is feeling for her mom throughout the book is definitely drawn on my own experience, although it's very different when you lose a parent as a teenager as opposed to an adult. But I was able to draw on that. And then the relationship with her sister is just, I have a sister. My sister she is my best friend. She and I are very close. And much like Emme and her sister, there's definitely that sister antagonism and push and pull that happens, I think, in all sibling relationships. So that's definitely from my own life as well.
What's the early review of the book? How are your beta readers responding to your story?
It's been very positive. We did get a rave review in Publishers Weekly, which was really, really exciting. That happened right before Christmas. So I was like, oh, what a Christmas gift. They called it a winner, which was really exciting. Maybe it's because nobody wants to say anything bad to my face, but everybody who reads it has loved it, which is great. I think it's a kind of book that everybody can enjoy. It's not a straight procedural. It has a lot of character-driven plot points in it, and it's also not straight what would be called women's fiction. It's not literary, so it has a lot of that commercial quality. So I feel like it walks this really fine line between being a little bit literary and a little bit and definitely more commercial, but it does have that character driven feel to it. So if you're not looking for a straight procedural mystery, you want something with a little bit more character driven, and I feel like you'll get that from this book. So I think that's why it's appealing to people.
We're in conversation with Nicole Maggi. Her very first smash hit was the YA thriller The Forgetting, a finalist for the International Thriller Writers Award and a #1 Kindle bestseller. She has another hit in the mainstream with A Murder in Zion. Nicole, why do you write?
I've been writing since I could hold a pen. I was writing poems about rainbows and unicorns when I was 6, and it's just always been a part of me. I love to tell stories. I think it's just the way I need to express myself. I feel like my voice, it's my voice. It's how I speak to the world. And I got some of that when I was an actor too. But when you're an actor, you're speaking other people's words. And when you're a writer, it's your own words. When I was an actor, I filled the time when I wasn't on stage with writing. And eventually it became more creatively fulfilling to me to be a writer than to be an actor. And I've gone through periods of my writing career that have been not great, where publishing has smacked me down and it's been really hard to pull myself back up. And I've had moments where I'm like, that's it, I'm done. And it never takes. I just keep coming back to it because I feel like there have been moments where I've gone long stretches of time without writing. And I call it like the itch. Like I start to feel itchy, like I'm not comfortable in my skin because I'm not being my authentic self, because I'm not doing what I'm meant to be doing. So that's why I write. And honestly, it keeps me sane. And I'm sure my husband would tell you that it keeps him sane too. Because when I'm not writing, I'm not a happy person.
Like many of us, you've had your ups and downs in life. Where does your
Yeah.
resilience come from?
Yeah, I think a lot of it does come from losing my mom when I was 14. And I think that having to go through that at such a young age and like being able to still function and grow up and find my place in the world, I think that's where it comes from. And my mom was a really strong woman. She had lupus. She had an autoimmune disease. And this was like back in the 80s. So it was not treated the way it is now. But she was so tough. Like she grew up on Staten Island, New York. She was Italian. She was feisty. She was really tough. She grew up in a very Catholic household, but she worked as a registered nurse, and she was like vehemently pro-choice and partnered with Planned Parenthood. And so she was definitely like a trailblazer. She was a really tough woman. And I think I get a lot of that from her, just her backbone. I think I get a lot of that from her.
What are your favorite moments as a creator? What makes you joyful in the writing process?
I think it's those moments when everything is clicking and you're in that groove. Usually you hit it. For me, I usually hit it maybe a third to a half of the way into the book, and you even get it like in that vomit copy, even though you're like, this is crap and it's going to be edited, but you're in that groove and you know where the story is going, and your fingers are just flying over the keyboard, and you can feel what your character is feeling, and you can see what they're seeing, and you're experiencing what they're experiencing. I think those are the best moments. And also the accolades are not bad. I'm an extrovert. I'm like the rare author who is an extrovert. Most of my author friends are introverts, but I love doing events and I love being out among readers and other writers. And to me, there's like nothing more fun than gathering at a bar with other writers and just like bitching about writing and the publishing industry. I love that. I just love getting together with other writers and talking writing. And I love meeting readers. Signing a book to a reader, or like going into a bookstore and seeing your book on the shelf, like that never goes away. It doesn't matter how many books you publish, like that, the thrill of that never goes away.
How did true crime influence the writing of A Murder in Zion?
Yeah, true crime like obsession that our society has, I think is so interesting. And I think it is especially interesting that so many like true crime, I don't want to say fans, because it's not like we're fans of true crime. We're just like fans of like learning about it and educating ourselves. And the majority of fans are women. And I think it's because there are so many crimes perpetuated against women. And it is fascinating for us and educational for us to learn that and learn what can we possibly do to maybe protect ourselves. But that didn't have so much of a bearing on the book. The book does have some characters and I guess characters in it that are very loosely based on real crimes. There is like a Mormon fundamentalist, I don't want to say cult, but sect in the book. And that is that is based on the LeBaron family. And the LeBaron family was they are a Mormon family that broke away from mainstream Mormonism in the early 20th century. And they had a patriarch of their family in the 60s and 70s who went on a reign of terror, killing a bunch of his own family members. And so that family in the book is like pretty heavily based on that, although it's very different than the real crimes that were perpetuated by that family. And the crime that haunts Emme that happened before the book, the one that she screwed up on, that is very loosely based on the Gabby Petito murder, which happened in 2021. And for anyone who doesn't know, it was this very lovely young woman who was traveling cross country with her boyfriend, and he strangled her to death outside of one of the I think it was the Grand Tetons. And she was found a few weeks later. I followed that very closely. There is an element of that, but I don't like to say that it's inspired by or whatever, because I'm always very cognizant of the fact that these were real people. These were real victims that had horrible things done to them. And there are families out there who are still suffering. And I would never want a family member to pick up my book and recognize like their family member in the book and feel exploited. Like, I don't want that at all. But there are just so many incredibly fascinating cases out there that it's really hard to not be influenced by it and to not put shades of them into the book. And there are a couple of like true crime Easter eggs in the books that people who maybe are as obsessed as I am will recognize them. So
the book is A Murder in Zion. It is the debut adult fiction release from our very special guest, best-selling YA author Nicole Maggi. Nicole, this is great. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you. Thank you.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.